Hey guys, welcome back to the quiet side of history. Tonight's journey is a little soggier than usual. So dim the lights maybe turn on a fan for that ambient bog breeze get cozy, but not too cozy. Because where you're going, the closest thing to comfort is a damp bucket and a leech stuck behind your knee. And yes, that squirming is real. And no, you can't afford to lose that one. It's your paycheck. So before we dive in, pun very much intended, go ahead and tap like. If you enjoy falling asleep to the sound of existential dread mixed with mild educational content, subscribe to the channel for more forgotten professions that ruin people's lives. And tell me in the comments, are you listening while working, winding down, or lying in bed? Wondering how it ever came to this, because tonight, you're not just some modern soul scrolling through bedtime videos, you are a leech collector in medieval England, and the only thing thinner than your coin purse is your will to live. You wake up before sunrise because time isn't a luxury you have not when the church bell controls your life, and the Lord of the Manor controls everything else. And the moment your eyes creak open, you're greeted by the smell of mold-wet wool, and whatever your cousin stepped in last night, because you're all sleeping in one room on one shared pile of straw. And the straw isn't so much golden as it is a mulch of hair. Mildew and last week's vomit, you shift to get up. But your body doesn't respond immediately. Your legs are numb from cold, and the fact that your shoes never fully dried after yesterday's shift in the marsh and your tunic is already clinging to your skin. Damp, not from sweat, but from the collective breath of your sleeping siblings. Your mother grunts beside you, swats at an invisible gnat, and mutters something about not forgetting the prayer this time. But let's be honest. At this hour, your only prayer is that nothing bit you in your sleep. You grope around in the murky grey light for your outer cloak, more whole than fabric at this point, and find it already half frozen from being hung too close to the wall, which we'll generously call insulated, but really, it's just wattle and daub, pretending it's not falling apart. Outside the wind whistles in a way that makes you rethink every life choice you never got to make. But you drag yourself to your feet because the leeches won't collect themselves. Not yet anyway. Although sometimes you wonder if they're the smarter species, all things considered. You shove a piece of bark in your boot where the sole's worn through and stagger outside the yard that greets you, with the fragrance of pig slop, human waste, and something sulphurous that probably means the latrine pit is full again. Lucky for you, breakfast is ready, or would be if your brother hadn't eaten most of it before you got up. What remains is a chunk of barley bread, so stale it could double as a weapon, and a smear of goose fat clinging to the bottom of a cracked bowl. You eat it anyway, eyes watering slightly, not from emotion, but because the smoke from the hearth chokes you every morning without fail. Someone says something about it being your turn to bring in water, but you pretend not to hear your ears, still half frozen, and your soul halfway out of your body. The family barely speaks in the mornings anymore. Not because they're angry, but because the weight of routine presses down so hard. There's no room left for words. You wrap your threadbare cloak around you tighter, which is hilarious because it's like trying to stop a flood with a napkin and make your way toward the bog, stepping over chickens, puddles, and the occasional rat that may or may not be dead. The sky is still dark, the color of dirty wool, and your breath fogs in front of you like a ghost trying to escape your mouth. You reach the edge of the marsh and already your boots are making that familiar sucking noise, like the earth is trying to eat you slowly. You wade in, knowing that for the next several hours, your job is to bleed, stand still, and hope something latches on And not in a romantic way, no. You're the bait. You use your own warm blood to attract the very creatures you'll later pull off your skin and dump into a bucket. And that's the part of your career path no one mentions at career fairs. You stand waist deep in brown water trousers, soaked legs shivering, and wait for the telltale pinch of a hungry leech finding purchase. The first one hits your calf, the second near your knee. By the time the third one latches onto your thigh, you're already bargaining with the heavens, begging that today you don't pass out from blood loss or get an infection from whatever just floated past you. And all the while, the village thinks you're lucky to have a trade. Something you can do without needing land or a plough. Something honest that helps people. And maybe it does help, just not you. Not really. You're underpaid, overbled, and somehow still expected to tithe at church, even though you haven't seen a clean coin since you were 6. And as the cold creeps up your spine and the sun starts to rise, you realize this is just the beginning of your day, the part where your toes still have feeling and your mind hasn't fully processed how long it will be until your next meal. The leeches begin to swell, fattening themselves on your blood like tiny bankers, and you reach for your wooden bucket, already imagining how many you'll need to meet your quota. And just when you think this can't possibly get more unpleasant, something brushes against your leg that is definitely not a plant. You freeze, heart racing. But then you remember, this is your life now, and no one's coming to change it. So you suck in a breath, slap another leech into the bucket, and whisper the words that get you through every single godforsaken morning. Just 12 more hours, and if you're lucky, maybe one bowl of soup. But hey, you're alive mostly. And that counts for something, right? You thought that was bad. Wait until you see what they make you do with the leeches. You used to think breakfast was supposed to be comforting, maybe even joyful. The kind of thing you look forward to after a long night's sleep. But then again, you also used to think mud was just for pigs and not a permanent part of your diet. Because here in your delightful little medieval existence, breakfast is less of a meal and more of a survival challenge. A ritual humiliation served cold, soggy, and occasionally moving. You trudge back from the swamp after the first leech haul of the day, with a bucket that smells like metallic death, and a face so numb you can't tell if you're frowning. And congratulations, you've earned yourself half a crust of damp barley bread, already gnawed at by someone who swore they were just checking for mold, which spoiler. There was plenty of the bread hits your stomach with the grace of a brick soaked in river water. And the morning's beverage of choice is, as always, whatever you can strain through your teeth from the community bucket, flavored faintly with moss rat fur and broken dreams. Your little brother offers you a sniff of something he calls cheese, but you're pretty sure is just a hardened lump of curdled regret, and you consider refusing it. But hunger overrides pride, and you swallow it with a grimace that'll linger longer than the taste. Which is unfortunate, because the taste isn't leaving anytime soon. And now it's time for your hygiene routine, or as it's known around here, not dying of visible filth. You splash water on your face from a wooden bowl that has seen better centuries and scrape last night's swamp scum from behind your ears, using a shard of pottery you keep in your cloak. Like a treasured relic, soap is for the rich or the clergy. And since you're neither, your body remains a tribute to the earth, layered in natural oils, bug bites, and the occasional fungal bloom. You use a bone comb to hack through the mat of your hair, dislodging a small beetle that seems genuinely offended to be evicted. And when you finally feel clean enough to blend in with the pigs, you're informed it's time to head back to the marsh, because apparently the 4 leeches you gathered before dawn aren't enough to justify your continued existence on this cursed plane of reality. You try to stall, claiming you need to pray or poop or patch a hole in your sock, but your mother narrows her eyes and says, "There's dignity in hard work which is objectively false, and especially ironic coming from someone currently peeling dried leeches off a rag with her teeth. Dignity left this place generations ago, probably around the time someone decided swamp blood sponge was a viable career path. So off you go again, bucket in hand, back into the ankle-deep squelch of the bog, and by now the sun's up, which sounds nice, except it's filtered through a thick blanket of grey clouds that make everything look like a wet funeral. The frogs croak in judgment, the water snakes give you side-eye, and your legs have already gone from shivering to stiff to suspiciously numb. But you press on because the day won't torture itself, and neither will the leeches. And speaking of torture, it's time to make yourself extra appealing by nicking your ankle with a sharpened reed, just a tiny bleed to sweeten the deal. For your blood-sucking clientele, the cut stings, then oozes, then bubbles faintly as the water closes over it, and almost immediately the first leech makes its way over, drawn to you like a noble. To tax money, it latches on with a horrifying pop, and you wince. Not because it hurts, though it does, but because you know. This means you'll be standing here for the next few hours, swaying gently like a haunted scarecrow, hoping the tiny vampires do their job so you can make just enough coin to buy a turnip that hasn't been pre-gnawed by rats around you. Other collectors are doing the same, mostly children and the elderly, the expendable and the desperate. Some wear long socks for protection, but most just let the leeches bite, where they may legs spotted red skin raw from years of unpaid labor. There's a girl next to you humming a hymn under her breath, probably to drown out the sound of the worms writhing in her bucket, and someone's grandpa just passed out in the reeds again. Nobody rushes to help, because we all know he'll either wake up or he won't, and either way, the leeches don't care. The sun creeps higher, but it doesn't bring warmth, only glare bouncing off the slick water and burning your retinas. The breeze picks up and carries the smell of mildew, sweat, and your own slowly cooking misery. Time becomes meaningless out here, measured only in blood loss and how much your feet have shriveled into something resembling ancient leather. Finally, your bucket is full enough to pass inspection, though you've lost sensation in at least 2 toes, and there's a suspicious cramp crawling up your spine. You shuffle back toward the village bucket, sloshing with the squirming horrors you coaxed from the swamp. And as you near your hut, you hear your name shouted, not out of love, but because your uncle needs help scraping leeches off the ceiling. Don't ask. It's a long story involving a tip jar, a drop candle, and screaming. So much screaming, you set the bucket down beside the hearth and stretch your back with the elegance of a collapsing fence post, only to be handed a cloth and told to clean up before visitors arrive. And by visitors they mean the church, physician who trade silver for the best leeches and contempt for the people who collect them, and you have to smile and pretend you don't notice him flinching when you hand over your bucket, as if you're the one who smells like rot and not the contents of his own purse. He nods, tosses you half a coin, and walks away muttering about how it's hard to find good bloodsuckers these days. And you don't even have the energy to laugh at the irony because you know what's next. You know the routine, and you know that no matter how bad this part was, it's only going downhill from here. So you rinse your hands in a basin of swamp water, wipe them dry on a towel that might actually be a piece of an old shirt, and prepare yourself for the next phase of the day, because it's time to talk fashion health and what happens when leeches aren't the worst thing growing on your body. You thought breakfast was a disaster. Wait until you see what passes for medicine. You never imagined that dressing yourself could feel like a slow form of punishment, like someone looked at your body and thought, how do we make every inch of this person suffer just a little bit more? Because when it's time to suit up for the day in your finest medieval leech collecting ensemble, you're not slipping into anything breathable, waterproof, or even intact, no. You're dragging on a tunic so rough it could exfoliate the bark off a tree woven from the world's itchiest wool, and soaked in so many years of swamp vapor that it now smells permanently like despair. Your undergarments, if you're lucky enough to have them, are thin linen rags that cling to you like cold algae. And if you're unlucky, you just skip that step and let nature do its worst. You're hosed the medieval version of leggings, but with more holes in the thread, are sagging in places that threaten to become public indecency. And your shoes, if they can still be called that, are leather scraps tied together with twine. Each step reminding you of the time before they had holes, before they filled with leech juice, before the soles gave out like your last shred of dignity. Your cloak is supposed to protect you from the wind, but the wind just passes through, like it pays rent, and the only real use it serves now is hiding how much of your skin has started to peel from constant exposure to stagnant water and mild infections. Speaking of skin, let's talk about yours, because nothing says medieval glamour like an untreated fungal rash spreading up your thighs while flea bites pepper your arms like you lost a fight with a blackberry bush. And oh, the fleas, they never leave no matter how much you scratch, soak, or scream into the night. They burrow into your seams, your socks, your scalp, where you've developed a delightful colony of nits that no amount of bone combing can remove. And you know they're thriving because you keep waking up with new scabs on your neck. But of course, that's not even the worst infestation. No, the true crown jewel of your bodily ecosystem is the persistent rumor that you once had a leech nest behind your knee, which you laughed at until you realized the swelling wasn't going away, and the fevered dreams had names. Medical care, if you can call it that, comes in two flavors, prayer or scraping. The village healer offers a mixture of dried nettles and superstition, and your cousin swears by rubbing dung on wounds because it draws out the spirits, which it does. Mostly the spirit of regret you tried once to get treatment for a festering cut on your ankle and ended up with a chunk of your leg burned with a heated iron to balance the humours. And now it throbs every time it rains, which is always, the truth is, you are your own doctor, your own nurse, your own poorly informed pharmacist. So you learn to live with the discomfort, the dripping, the oozing, the unholy mixture of mud and blood that follows you like a loyal pet. And people wonder why you always stand during prayer. It's because sitting is an invitation for something to hatch. And now your joints ache from malnutrition, your breath smells like spoiled barley, and you can't remember the last time you didn't feel some kind of persistent low-grade pain. The kind that you ignore not because it goes away, but because it's just part of who you are now. Like your eyebrows or your fear of thunder. Your teeth, by the way, are a disaster. You've lost 3 in the past year alone to rot and trauma. 1 from biting into a rock hidden in bread. 2 from an argument with your uncle that ended in a headbutt and a nosebleed. And none have grown back. which is unfortunate because you still chew like you've got a full set, and now your gums bleed every time you laugh, which is rare but still mildly concerning. The only upside to your current physical condition is that no one bothers robbing you. Not because you're intimidating, but because you look like you're already halfway dead and might curse them if they touch your bucket. Your nails are black with grime, your knuckles cracked and bleeding from cold and work, and you've developed a hunch from years of trudging through the marsh, dragging that damn bucket behind you like it's chained to your soul, and yet you press on because there's no other option, no retirement plan, no vacation from being the human vending machine for medieval bloodletting practices. You don't even get respect, not from your neighbors who wrinkle their noses when you walk by, not from the monks who take your leeches and say they'll pray for your soul. Like you're already lost, not from your own reflection, which you caught once in a puddle and didn't recognize. Gaunt, tired eyes ringed in shadow and framed by filth. You look like a ghost auditioning for a haunting that got cancelled, and still you keep going. Because what else is there? Death comes for everyone. But until it does, you're stuck in this body, this skin, this walking infection held together by stubbornness and a constant stream of sarcastic inner commentary. And when someone tells you to count your blessings, you start counting. Still breathing, still standing, still haven't stepped on a nail today. And then you run out of blessings. But the counting helps, sort of. And as the wind picks up and the cold starts settling into your bones, you pull your tattered cloak around your shoulders, adjust your leech-bitten belt, and prepare to head back out again. Because the marsh doesn't care how raw your feet are, or how badly your stomach cramps from whatever you just ate. It just wants your blood, and you've got no choice but to give it. So you take one more breath, spit a loose tooth into the mud, and whisper to yourself that it could be worse because you haven't even reached your work shift yet. And believe me, if you think being dressed like a wet corpse covered in flea eggs is bad, wait until you find out what counts as labor in this glorious little slice of history. There's something uniquely humbling about a commute that tries to eat you alive every single morning, and not metaphorically either. We're talking literal bog water sucking at your boots with every step, like the earth itself is trying to pull you back into the womb. But skip the part where wombs were warm or remotely inviting you. Head out before sunrise again, because if you don't get to the leech pools early, someone else might claim the good spot, the one with fewer biting flies and slightly less risk of spontaneous drowning. And you can't afford that kind of luxury loss. Not when your entire career depends on how many bloodsuckers you can convince to latch onto your already mangled legs, so you trudge half-blind in the fog, cloak dragging through the reeds like a dying flag bucket, clutched to your chest like it holds something more valuable than your dignity, which, let's be honest, checked out a long time ago. The chill hits harder today, turning your joints into creaking hinges and your breath into a series of desperate little clouds. And by the time you reach the marsh, you're soaked in sweat and dew. And whatever that black slime was, you stepped in just past the fence. The water greets you with its usual welcome, a soft squelch, a loud squish, and the unmistakable feeling that something just slithered across your foot. And you wade in because this is your life now. Ankle deep in rot up to your shins, in misery, thighs screaming in protest as you settle into your designated leeching stance, motionless arms limp at your sides like a scarecrow. Nobody respects, and the first few minutes are always the worst, because they involve waiting and thinking and remembering that you could have been anything else if you'd been born to someone with land or coin or even a functioning cow. but instead you're here bleeding for coin in the name of medicine and misery, waiting for the first of many slimy clients to arrive. It doesn't take long. They always know when blood is in the water, and the first pinch feels like a tiny hot needle sinking into your skin, followed by the slow numbing spread of their peculiar anesthetic slime, which would almost be impressive if it weren't currently rearranging your blood chemistry, more come one after the other, latching on with obscene enthusiasm. Little gurgling monsters turning your legs into an all-you-can-suck buffet. And you stand there letting it happen, because if you flinch too much, they'll fall off, and you'll have to start all over again behind you. Someone coughs a wet barking sound that makes you wince, but no one checks because we all know checking means taking responsibility, and no one has the energy for that anymore. Not here, not now, not when every minute spent in the swamp is a gamble between making money and catching something you can't pronounce. The noblemen say it's a noble trade, that you're helping the sick and the sinful purge their humours, but they've never seen what a leech does to a person's foot. After 12 hours, or how your calves swell like overcooked sausages, or what happens when one crawls just a little too far north. And you don't complain, because complaints are a luxury of people with options, and your only option right now is to bleed and wait and try not to pass out from the growing dizziness that comes with serving as nature's tap when your bucket is half full. You take a short break, which consists of collapsing on a log and trying to figure out whether that tingling in your spine is early stage tetanus or just the usual swamp neuropathy. You eat a cold root you dug up on the way here, chewing slowly to delay the moment you have to stand back up. And you watch the others, the old man with one eye who swears the leeches talk to him, the boy with no shoes whose feet have turned the same color as the water, the girl who hums lullabies to her bucket like it's her child. And for a moment, you wonder if you're the only one still pretending this is normal, still holding on to the whisper of an idea that one day, maybe you won't be doing this. Maybe someone will invent something, a better cure, a different job, a world where no one needs to bleed into the water just to afford a loaf of bread that won't crack your teeth, but the thought passes as quickly as it came, drowned out by the sound of your name being yelled from across the marsh. And you groan because you know what's coming. Another flooded pasture, another rush order, another nobleman's servant demanding double the usual haul by sundown because his master had too much wine and now believes he's possessed by swamp demons. So you stand, knees trembling, and get back to work, tossing a handful of full leeches into the bucket and hoping at least one of them survives the trip back, because you get paid by the leech, not by the effort, and certainly not by the trauma you think about quitting. Sometimes not seriously, just in that vague way people daydream about jumping out of windows during long meetings, except in your case the window is your own grave and the meeting is your entire existence. And even if you quit what, then it's not like there's an internship program for upward mobility. So you keep going step after miserable step through the bog, numb from the knees down, carrying a bucket full of your own suffering, and the sun starts to rise higher, but doesn't warm you, not really. It just exposes more of the floating carcasses and the skeletal reeds that line your path. And you keep your head down, eyes on the bucket feet, dragging, until someone shouts again, this time louder, more urgent, and you know without turning that it's the overseer, the one with the stick and the bad breath and the tiny man complex who thinks yelling equals leadership, and he wants you to move faster, to be more productive, to hustle, as if you're not already one with the swamp at this point. So you pick up the pace, trying not to drop the bucket, trying not to cry, trying not to scream at the absurdity of it all. And just as you reach the edge of the marsh, just as you think you might get a few minutes to breathe, he blocks your path and says, "You've got another round to do before you can rest." And you look down at your feet, at the blood-stained water, at the bloated leeches twisting in your bucket, and wonder how it is that something so small could suck the life out of you so completely. And then you realize you're not even talking about the leeches anymore. But you don't say anything because what's the point? You thought your commute was bad before. Wait until you see who gets credit for your work. You'd think, after bleeding into the swamp all morning and peeling half a dozen leeches off your thighs with fingers so cold they barely move, that maybe, just maybe, you'd earn a shred of respect from someone. But medieval society doesn't really hand out gold stars for human sponge duty. Not when you're sitting at the very bottom of the social compost heap alongside dung collectors, pig herders, and that guy who cleans the public latrine with his hands. You drag your soggy self toward the village square, boots slopping, blood still oozing from a bite behind your knee. And as you pass the cobbled together houses with their leaning beams and judgmental chickens, the locals glance at you with that same familiar mix of disdain and denial, like you're a useful disease. They'd rather pretend doesn't exist, children whisper Leech boy behind your back while throwing pebbles, not hard enough to bruise, but just enough to remind you who's who. And you don't blame them, not really, because when everyone's stacked in misery like rotting firewood, the only power left is punching down, and you're basically on the floor already. You duck into the market row because you've been summoned again by the steward of the manor, a man whose entire personality is composed of damp cloaks and inherited smugness. He waves a gloved hand and scowls as if your presence personally insults the Lord's wheat yields, and informs you that his grace requires fresh leeches for his gout foot and his concubine's emotional imbalance, which might just be code for being literate. But you nod anyway, and try not to breathe through your nose because the steward's breath smells like salted fish and political rot. He tosses you a cracked clay token. As payment, a promise of future compensation that will absolutely be forgotten next week, and sends you on your way with a threat about work ethic and your family's rent. And you think about arguing for a split second until you remember that talking back gets you fined or flogged depending on the steward's mood and whether he's already had lunch. So you smile with your teeth what's left of them and retreat to your corner of the world, which is to say, the mud hole behind the tanner's shed, where nobody goes unless they're desperate or dead. You squat there with your bucket and your bad decisions and try to scrape what dignity you can from the slop. But it's hard when the church bell rings and reminds you it's nearly midday and you haven't even tithed yet, so you drag yourself toward the chapel bucket in hand, hoping maybe the priest won't notice you smell like fermented frog. But no such luck, Father. Cedric spots you instantly, nose wrinkling like he's been cursed, and he greets you with the warmth of a cold confession. He talks a lot about sin, yours specifically, and how your bloodletting is an unholy parody of divine punishment. But he still takes the leeches when the apothecary needs them, and you wonder if he realizes the irony, or if irony was excommunicated along with fun. You stand outside the church doors like a diseased gargoyle, while others file in, eyes darting, robes clean, not a single leech bite in sight, and you offer a half prayer to whatever god still bothers listening, asking for warmth, for food, for anything that doesn't come with a squelch. The sky has begun to spit rain again. Not enough for a storm, just enough to remind you that your socks haven't been dry since last spring, and you consider ducking under the overhang by the alehouse. But the barkeep's wife saw you yesterday and made a sign against evil, so you shuffle off drenched and head toward the edge of the village where the other workers are gathering for the afternoon. So a twice-weekly event where your catch is weighed, counted, and casually devalued by the overseer, who has never once touched a leech in his life. He sits on a dry crate under a dry awning and gestures for your bucket with 2 fingers, that probably never had a callus, then uses a stick to stir your leeches like soup, declares them underfed, and docks your tally. You want to scream that maybe they're underfed because your blood's running thin from eating nothing but boiled turnips and shame. But instead, you bite your tongue and take the wooden chip he hands you. A record of your haul to be exchanged for actual coin if you live long enough and move aside, so the next poor soul can get degraded in your place. There's a hierarchy here. You see not just noble and peasant, but within the peasantry itself, a delicate system of rot and favoritism, where the most broken get the least blame, and the least broken get blamed for everyone else's survival. And somehow you've ended up in the sweet spot of visibility, without power, suffering, without sympathy, essential, without esteem. Even the animals seem to know their place better than you do. The village dogs wag their tails for butchers. The cats lounge by bakers' ovens. The oxen get names and songs. But you get oi swamp thing out of the way from a child half your size. And as you step aside and the mud sucks at your boots again, you wonder how much of you is still a person and how much has become part of the environment, part of the wet background of other people's lives. You're not a hero, not a villain, not even an afterthought, just a body moving through muck with a bucket of worms and a prayer that doesn't work. And as the sun tries weakly to break through the clouds and fails like everything else in this godforsaken timeline, you squint at the village bell and calculate how many hours you have left before you can collapse in the straw again. Because there's still work to do, still rules to obey, still layers of social grime to wade through, and no matter how many leeches you pull off your flesh, the system always has more waiting to latch on you. Thought being poor was the bottom of the food chain. Wait until you realize that even the people who rely on you will never see you as anything more than bait. By now, the rain has picked up just enough to feel personal, like the sky itself has decided you've had it too easy, bleeding into the swamp and being socially flattened by every human above the age of 4. And now, it's time for the weather to join in and remind you that medieval climate control consists of muttering curses at clouds and stuffing straw into your sleeves. You trudge through the muck with the grace of a waterlogged scarecrow, clothes clinging like desperate regrets, cloaks soaked to the point of becoming a portable mildew farm. And as your body gives a full-body shiver that rattles your ribs, you start to notice something even worse than being wet. Being cold and wet and surrounded by things that are alive but shouldn't be. The marsh is louder now, not with birdsong or anything remotely poetic, but with the squelching of hidden creatures and the distant, almost polite splashing of something large that probably didn't start out with that many legs. You try to convince yourself it's just another boar or a confused cow that wandered too far from the barn, but the locals whisper stories about this part of the bog, about spirits and beasts and cursed monks who wandered into the marsh and came out speaking only in frog. And while you don't consider yourself superstitious, There's something deeply unsettling about a patch of reeds that seem to shift when you're not looking, and water that bubbles even when nothing moves you. Tell yourself to keep walking, to focus on the task at hand, which is to gather one final bucket of bloodsuckers before nightfall, so you can earn enough to buy half a loaf of something vaguely edible, and maybe patch the growing hole in your sock with something more substantial than good intentions. But your nerves have other plans, your heartbeat thuds louder than the rain, and your legs feel like they're wading through soup made of nerves and embarrassment. And then just as you step into a pool of water that reaches your knees and smells like a frog funeral, you feel it, that familiar pinch followed by another. Then a cluster, your lower leg suddenly alive with movement and heat, and the grim realization that your flesh is no longer just your own. The leeches have returned enthusiastic as ever, and you swear one of them has found the inside of your shoe again, which is a betrayal on par with your cousin stealing your only blanket last winter. But you don't shake them off, not yet, because you need them, fat, swollen, dripping with your diluted life force. Before you can count the job as done, you brace yourself against a nearby tree stump that may or may not be breathing, and you wait, one hand on your bucket, the other clenched into a fist around a small talisman your grandmother gave you when she was still coherent, supposedly carved from saint's bone, but more likely goat toenail still. It brings you the illusion of comfort, and that's good enough for now. Eventually the buzzing in your ears drowns out the ribbits and rustling, and you fall into that familiar marsh trance where time softens and the pain becomes background noise, just another sensation like hunger or dread. But you're jolted back by the sound of a scream, sharp, human, young, and you spin around fast enough to splash yourself in the eye, vision blurry, as you stagger toward the sound, because nobody screams like that in the swamp, unless something's gone very, very wrong. And sure enough, you find one of the village boys, maybe 8, maybe 9, already full-time bait standing ankle deep in a pool of leeches, shrieking and shaking his arms, while 2 bloated monsters dangle from his fingers like grotesque jewelry. You rush over, slap them off, check his face for bites, realize too late that your own legs are still leaking freely, and when he finally stops screaming, he just sobs and points at the water, where a lump is floating, pale and silent, and distinctly human. Someone else didn't make it home last night. You don't recognize the face, but you don't need to. Just one more name whispered in the tavern, and never spoken again. You take the boy's hand and guide him back toward the village, but every step feels heavier now, not because of your soaked clothing or the pulsing blood loss, but because something in the swamp shifted, not just in the water, but inside you. Like a line got crossed you didn't even know existed, and the absurdity of it all hits you harder than it has in weeks. The sheer ridiculousness of a world where 8-year-olds have workplace trauma and leeches are a viable economic model. You laugh, not a normal laugh, but the kind that starts in your throat and shakes loose from your ribs like a cough. And the boy looks at you like you've lost your mind, which maybe you have, because who wouldn't? When the only consistent part of your job is becoming a living buffet for creatures you aren't even allowed to kill. And when you finally stumble back into town dragging your bucket and your existential crisis, you get exactly the welcome you expect, none. People glance at you, notice you're still upright, and return to their conversations about weather pigs and the priest's suspiciously nice boots. No one asks about the body, because asking means caring, and caring means responsibility, and responsibility is a luxury reserved for people with dry homes and clean hands. So you drop the boy at the chapel and hope someone feeds him something warmer than regret. And you turn back toward your hut with just enough time to clean up before supper, assuming you still have the strength to wring the swamp out of your tunic and light a fire that doesn't immediately snuff itself out in protest. And you tell yourself you're lucky after all. You're not the one floating face up in the water. You still have all your fingers technically, and your bucket's full, which means you've done your job. And isn't that all? Anyone can ask in a world where the highest praise is silence and the greatest reward is being ignored. You thought this was a simple trade catch. Some leeches bleed a little, go home. But today reminded you that sometimes the swamp doesn't just take blood. It takes names, memories, and if you're not careful, the last fragile thread holding your mind together. And the worst part is tomorrow, you'll do it all again. Because you have to. Because the leeches aren't going to collect themselves. And neither is your rent. And you're just one bad bite away from joining the mud permanently. But hey, you're still standing, still breathing, still twitching occasionally. And in this line of work that basically makes you royalty, the air shifts before you notice the clouds, a quiet heaviness that settles on your shoulders like wet laundry. And it's the kind of atmosphere that makes birds stop singing and frogs start hiding though. Let's be honest, the frogs are smarter than you. They know what's coming. And by the time you glance up and see the sky smeared with the dull grey of incoming rain again, you're already too far into the marsh to turn back too deep in the daily misery to even feel surprised. You just tighten your grip on the bucket, squint against the drizzle, and keep trudging, because the leeches are out, whether the sun shines or not, and your debt doesn't care if the weather's biblical. The world feels swollen with dampness. Every step, a soft protest from the ground beneath you. The reeds wave like they're warning you. The wind carries the scent of rot and something distinctly mammalian, but long past its expiration date. And as you pause to adjust the ragged strip of cloth you've called a sock for 3 years, you realize your feet have lost the ability to differentiate between mud and skin. It's all just one bloated, blistered continuum. Now there's a moment fleeting where you fantasize about losing your toes. Entirely, just having them fall off one by one, so you'd have a good excuse to stop working for a while. Maybe even earn a pity scrap from the baker or a blessing from the priest that doesn't involve backhanded guilt. But that thought evaporates when you hear a distant howl, low and ragged, carried across the bog like a secret. And it's not the usual village dog or drunken cousin. This time, it's something else. Something feral and old and hungry in the way only things with too many teeth and too few rules can be you freeze instinctively. Bucket halfway to the ground and scan the horizon for movement. But all you see are shifting shadows and the occasional bird taking the hint and bailing smart. You tell yourself, real smart, but you've got no such luxury. You're not going to outrun anything with claws and a grudge, especially not with your left knee, still clicking from that time you slipped on eel guts during market day. So you do what every good leech collector does when faced with something beyond your control. You keep your head down and pretend you didn't hear it, because acknowledging it might mean it's real. And if it's real, then you have one more thing to fear in a life already overflowing with anxieties. Like, will this bite get infected? Is that rash supposed to glow, and why did the water just burp? The deeper you go into the marsh, the more the world shrinks to your breath, your heartbeat and the squish of soaked leather. And you find a new spot to stand, a slightly more stable patch of bog next to a crooked willow. that smells faintly of mold and vengeance. It's here. You lower your feet into the water like sacrificial offerings and wait for the leeches to do their thing, and they never disappoint, eager as ever, squirming up to latch on with the kind of enthusiasm you wish your family had when you brought home food. Your calves go numb quickly, a combination of cold water and blood loss, and your hands shake not from fear but from fatigue, the kind that builds over months and years and lifetimes spent doing work that chips away at your soul. One bite at a time, you try to distract yourself by counting the leeches in your bucket, by imagining you're somewhere else. Anywhere else but your imagination has long since dried up, replaced by facts like how many bites it takes to black out, or which part of the swamp has the softest ground for collapsing into. When it all becomes too much, you lean on the willow for support and immediately regret it. When a clump of bark peels off, revealing a nest of something too fast to identify, and you stumble, catching yourself with a grunt that scares a bird into flight. And for a brief second, you envy the bird's effortless exit, its ability to leave the muck and the hunger and the overseer with a permanent sneer, and you look down at yourself, your soaked tunic clinging like a second skin, your hands cracked and purple from exposure, your legs covered in welts and blood and creatures that used to horrify you, but now feel more like co-workers, and you wonder, not for the first time, how far removed from an animal you really are. Not much. You decide not much at all. The rain intensifies heavy, now slicing through the reeds and flattening your hair against your scalp. And you don't bother shielding your face because there's no point. You've never been dry for more than a few hours in your entire adult life, and your body is a sponge that soaks up misery. So what's a little extra water? Visibility drops, and the sky turns a strange yellow-grey. And just when you start to feel like maybe the storm will pass and let you finish your haul, a bolt of lightning splits the sky, and the following crack of thunder is so loud you flinch your bucket tips, and a third of your day's catch slops back into the swamp. With an unceremonious splash you scream, not out of fear, but out of pure, undiluted rage. The kind that makes your throat roar and your fists shake because you're cold and hungry and bleeding, and now you have to start over. And no one will care, no one will ask, no one will say thank you for almost dying for the third time this week. And as you drop to your knees in the mud and begin scooping your leeches back into the bucket, with the determination of someone too poor to quit, you think this is it. This is who I am. The human embodiment of an unpaid medical bill slathered in swamp scum. And the worst part is this. Isn't even the worst part of your day, because the rain may stop, the storm may pass, and the leeches might refill your bucket. But the sun is going to set soon, and when it does, you're going to have to go back to the village, back to the people who see you as a stain on the road, and back to the realization that the only thing lower than a leech in this world is you. You head back through the swamp with the limp of someone who's been chewed on by nature, rejected by society, and possibly cursed by a passing monk with an eye twitch. And if your bucket sloshes a little less than it did this morning, that's just between you and the blood-sucking void, because no one in the village is going to give you a gold star for trying. And if they did, it would probably be made of actual straw and smeared with something that smells like turnip rot. The mud pulls at your feet like a toddler in a tantrum, and every few steps you have to stop, wheeze and shake a leech off your boot that somehow survived the trek. Resilient little nightmares that they are. Your tunic is glued to your back, your shoulders ache from hauling wet misery, and there's a sharp sting just under your armpit that suggests one of those freeloaders crawled further north than is legally allowed by common decency. You want to scream, to cry, to throw the bucket and curse the sky and collapse dramatically in the muck like a tragic hero. But the truth is, you're too tired for theatrics and too poor for options. So you keep moving, because forward is the only direction where the illusion of progress exists, and eventually the trees thin, the reeds give way to mud, spotted grass, and the village reappears on the horizon like a deeply disappointing relative. Familiar, necessary, and guaranteed to suck the joy out of any moment you pass the baker's shop, where the smell of actual bread punches you in the gut and triggers a drool response so powerful you consider chewing on your sleeve just to distract your brain. But you know, better than to slow down. Not when the baker's dog already has a taste for your ankles, and the last time you begged for crumbs, his wife sprayed you with vinegar and shouted something about curses and fleas, so you keep your eyes on the path and make your way toward the collection post, which is just a glorified wooden table manned by the same overseer who thinks empathy is a contagious disease. He's picking his teeth with a chicken bone when you arrive, and without looking up, he mutters something about being late, as if you personally arranged the thunderstorm and negotiated the Leech escape. Like a union boss, you set the bucket down, try to wipe the grime off your face and brace for the usual routine. He dips a stick into the bucket, swirls it like he's tasting soup, counts the contents with a grimace, then declares it a substandard haul, which is ironic, coming from a man who hasn't hauled anything but gossip since the last plague. He tells you he can only credit you half a token for the day's work, and you feel your stomach knot because half a token doesn't buy food, it doesn't cover rent, it doesn't even cover the cost of pretending everything is okay. But if you argue, he'll dock you for insubordination and report you to the priest. So you nod like a puppet with waterlogged joints, take the cursed chip and shuffle off without a word. As you pass the well, you pause hoping for a drink, only to find the bucket already empty, and the rope snapped a metaphor so on the nose you almost laugh. Instead you kneel, cup your hands and scoop a bit of standing rainwater from a barrel that might once have stored pickled something, and now stores only the ghost of flavor and a few insect families who've built generational homes on the rim. The water tastes like betrayal, but it's wet and it goes down. And that's the closest thing to luxury you're going to get before dusk. You drag yourself past the chapel where Father Cedric is lecturing a group of children about sin, likely pointing at you behind your back to drive the point home. And honestly, you don't blame him, because if being a public example gets him off your back for the week, let him have it. You've got bigger problems, like the growing rash on your ankle, the suspiciously missing toe, feeling in your left foot, and the creeping realization that this is your life. Not a temporary setback, not a rough season, just the forever pattern of waking up, giving blood, getting nothing, and going to bed, hoping nothing bites you in the night. By the time you make it to the edge of the village square, the sun is drooping like a tired eyelid, bleeding orange into the mud, and the scent of boiled cabbage drifts out of your neighbor's window. Like a cruel joke, your stomach gurgles loudly, reminding you that all you've eaten today was that one gnawed bread corner and a questionable root that might have been a tuber, or might have been someone's compost. And you debate whether it's worth visiting your uncle's hut to ask for a scrap. But the last time you did, he threw a ladle at your head and muttered something about leeches being bad luck. So you turn toward home, which is really just four walls and a roof. With ambitions, your siblings are already inside, huddled around the ember of a fire that barely remembers how to burn your mother's, hunched over the same pot she's been stirring for 3 days. And tonight's menu is thin soup with a side of thinner conversation. No one looks up when you enter. Not out of malice, but because everyone is too tired to pretend anymore. You sit lean against the wall and feel the wet slowly leach into the dirt beneath you, becoming part of the floor, part of the structure, part of the forgotten furniture that exists only to suffer and not make a fuss about it. Someone hands you a bowl, more of a cup really, with 3 sips of broth and a single bean floating like it's on vacation, and you slurp it without thinking, because hunger doesn't wait for manners. And as the fire cracks weakly and someone coughs in the corner, with a rattle that sounds like death is warming up its vocal cords, you close your eyes and let your head fall back, too tired to dream, too sore to shift, too numb to cry. And all you can think is that maybe, just maybe, tomorrow will be better. But you don't believe it. Not really, not anymore. You thought the swamp was the only thing that drained you. But it turns out the world is full of leeches. You just learn to stop counting after a while. You try to sleep, but the floor doesn't let you, not because it's particularly malicious, but because it's made of compacted dirt, half-rotten straw, and whatever seeped in from the marsh the last time the walls gave up. And it presses against your back like it's trying to reshape your spine into a more swamp-compatible posture, which is to say crooked hunched and permanently damp. Your siblings are already snoring in their designated dirt patches, and one of them is twitching in his sleep, like he's either dreaming of leeches or actively fighting one off. And you pull your ragged cloak tighter around your shoulders, even though it smells like mildew and feet and failure, because at least it blocks some of the cold from crawling down your neck and setting up shop in your lungs. Outside, the wind howls like an unpaid spirit and rattles the warped wooden shutter that never quite closes, sending flickers of lantern light across the walls like nervous ghosts. Your stomach growls again, not politely, not even pitifully, but with the full rage of a beast that knows you've lied to it about dinner, and you shove the bowl aside, still sticky from its 3 bean soup contents that somehow managed to taste like sadness and ash. Despite having no actual seasoning, the fire crackles weakly in the hearth, giving off more smoke than warmth, and the embers glow just enough to let you see the outlines of the familiar misery, your mother curled up on a pile of matted cloth, your brother's boot steaming by the fire, a small wooden carving of Saint Leodegar on the shelf, watching everything with that same blank expression that says, "Don't expect miracles," and you stare at the ceiling, which is less a ceiling and more a suggestion of one, as rainwater drips occasionally through the thatch and lands in a bucket near your feet, and that's pulling double duty as both leak catcher and tomorrow's wash basin. And even though you know it's pointless, your mind wanders, because that's what minds do when there's nothing left to distract them. It drifts back to what life might be like if you didn't spend your days marinating in mud, if you didn't fall asleep with a leech bite still oozing, and dreams that feel more like flashbacks. You imagine a world where clothes-fit food fills, and your job doesn't involve being eaten alive by something that doesn't even have a brain. But then the wind shifts and a familiar stench blows through the cracks. Rot wet wool, the lingering fart of a neighbor who's definitely still awake, and you're pulled back to reality with a sigh that sounds more like a death rattle. The door creaks, not open, just a small groan of protest as the wind pushes against it, and you tense, not because you expect anything worse than what you've already seen, but because it's habit now to brace for something worse, because there's always something worse. A tax collector, a drunken cousin, a dead goat in the well, or just another proclamation nailed to the town post, demanding more blood, more labor, more of what you don't have, and you wonder what time it is, not because it matters, but because it gives your brain something to chew on that isn't despair. Probably close to midnight or whatever, past for midnight before clocks existed. You listen for the bell, but it doesn't ring this late, and all you can hear is the low hum of your own exhaustion and the occasional cough from the next hut over. That sounds like someone trying to cough up a ghost. Sleep, you tell yourself, just sleep, but your body's not buying it. Not when your legs still itch from the bites and your back burns from standing like a human reed all day. Not when your skin's tight with dried swamp water and your thoughts keep running in circles like rats in a barrel. You close your eyes anyway, hoping that maybe if you pretend long enough, sleep will find you, and you drift in and out through that fuzzy borderland where dreams and memories blend together like poorly mixed soup. You dream of the marsh, but in the dream, it's clean, clear, almost beautiful, and the leeches are gone, replaced by something soft and gentle and entirely fictional. And for a moment, you feel peace. Real warm, bellyful peace. But then your brain yanks you back and reminds you, you're not allowed that. Not even in dreams, and the marsh turns dark again. The water rises, the sky screams, and your legs are dragging through mud that doesn't want to let go. And you wake with a gasp, sweaty, sore. The fire nearly out, and your hand clenched around your own ankle like you're trying to keep yourself anchored to this miserable little hut that you call home. Because calling it what it really is, temporary shelter from the apocalypse, that is your daily existence, feels like tempting fate. Your mother stirs, eyes opening just enough to check that you're still breathing. And then she turns over without a word, because what is there to say? You're still here, still upright, still twitching slightly from whatever horror dream just tried to throttle you. And that counts as a success. The moonlight leaks in through a crack in the wall and lands on the bucket by the door. The one where you keep your work tools, a small knife, a scrap of cloth, a bottle half full of vinegar, and you stare at it like it's a snake, because that bucket means morning is coming, and morning means the swamp, and the swamp means leeches, and leeches mean blood, and blood means coin, and coin means soup, and soup means survival, and it all loops back into itself like some horrific knot you were born tied into, and you try to close your eyes again to shut it all out. But the itch behind your knee flares up, and your foot cramps from being bent all night, and the ceiling drips again louder this time, and you realize you never emptied the bucket from yesterday's rain, and if you don't do it now you'll forget, and then you'll wash your face with swamp mold again, and so you groan, sit up, shuffle across the dirt like a very old man who was betrayed by time and his own knees, and tip the bucket outside into the puddle. That is your front yard, and the night air hits your face like a slap, cold and sharp, and full of that peculiar silence that only comes when everyone else is pretending to sleep. And you look out across the village where every hut is dark and still and miserable in its own way, and you wonder again how long this can go on. How long you can keep bleeding into the world without anything to show for it. How long before the mud takes more than just your warmth. long before you just let it, but then you hear a rooster crow way too early and as off-key as ever, and you sigh because that's your alarm clock and it means it's time to start again. Time to suit up, bleed out, and earn another half token of indifference. You thought the worst part was over. Wait until sunrise. Morning doesn't arrive so much as it leaks in grey and cold and smelling faintly of wet wood smoke and goat. And the rooster's been crowing for what feels like an hour now, off-key and possessed. Like even he resents being awake this early, but you're already up. Or at least you're upright, which isn't quite the same thing, because nothing about your body feels ready to begin again. Your knees snap when you stand, your spine creaks like the floorboards of a haunted church, and your skin itches in places too personal to scratch in front of family. You take one step toward the hearth and your ankle buckles with a squish that reminds you. The last bit of swamp never left your boots, just migrated north. You lift them to dump them out again, and out comes the standard cocktail of mud leech gunk, and one small wriggling survivor who looks personally offended by his eviction. You flick him toward the door with your toe and whisper something that probably counts as a curse. Then drag on your tunic still wet from yesterday's drying attempt, which involved hanging it by the fire and forgetting it until someone spilled broth on it during dinner. The wool slaps against your skin with the enthusiasm of cold seaweed, and you mutter good morning. Like it's an accusation the others are stirring now, shivering into consciousness with groans and sighs, and the kind of morning breath that can strip paint your younger brother's trying to pull lice out of his hair, using a fishbone comb, which would be endearing if it weren't also your comb and your mother's already outside checking the sky like she's bargaining with it. She's got the same look she always has before a storm. The resigned glare of a woman who knows her laundry will never dry, and that she'll probably bury someone this season. You join her mostly to pretend you have a choice, and the two of you stand in silence watching the fog roll over the fields like a curse on four legs. Then she says without turning, "Don't come back without something worth boiling, which in your family is as close to 'I love you' as it gets." And you nod, grab your bucket, and start the long wet shuffle back to the bog that raised you. The village is still half asleep, doors creaking open, chickens screaming existential nonsense. Someone's already slipped in the muck and cursed loud enough to wake the priest. And it's not even sunrise yet. Your legs protest with every step, the bites from yesterday swelling like angry punctuation marks on your skin, and you swear one of them is oozing something that smells like spoiled honey. But there's no time to worry about infection when your daily income depends on how many living band-aids you can convince to latch onto your blood vessels. The marsh greets you with the usual fanfare, frog's mist, that oddly warm squelch under your foot. That probably means something died there recently, and you head toward your usual patch already occupied by a new face. Some kid who hasn't figured out the trick of keeping the leeches off your groin. You nod in solidarity and move on, settling into a new corner of misery that seems less crowded with ghosts. You step in, feel the water fill your boots, feel your toes go numb, feel your soul try to file for emancipation, and stand still like the world's saddest statue waiting for the first bite. It comes quicker than usual, a sharp pinch on your calf, then another on your shin, then a third on your upper thigh. That suggests a particularly ambitious leech or possibly a prank from God, and you whisper, "Please, not the groin again," like a chant, because once was enough, and the memory still makes you wince. The sun finally crests the tree line and paints the marsh in a thin smear of yellow-grey, and for a moment it's almost beautiful. if you squint and pretend the bubbles in the water are just frogs and not gas escaping from something decomposing nearby. You watch a heron stab a fish in the distance and think that bird has it figured out. Stab, eat, fly away. But then again, maybe the fish had plans. Maybe the fish was a philosopher. Maybe none of this is fair, but all of it is inevitable. And you stand there bleeding and thinking, while the marsh claims another pint of your vitality in exchange for the promise of half a dinner and another sleepless night. Your fingers twitch from cold, your knees ache from stillness, and your stomach growls with the intensity of someone who had half a beet for breakfast and will probably have half a beet for dinner. And you begin to feel that weird, weightless detachment that creeps in when your blood sugar tanks and your body starts trying to negotiate with reality. You look down into your bucket half full already, with wriggling, glossy black things that have taken more from you than most people ever will. And you wonder, not for the first time, if you could just disappear into the bog sink slowly and silently and become a rumour. And if anyone would notice or just assume you finally got smart and ran. But you shake it off because you've got siblings to feed and no one else in your family can take this job. Your brother tried once and passed out before lunch. Your cousin pretended to drown until your mother beat him with a ladle, and your uncle keeps saying he's allergic to blood, which is a choice, considering he used to be a butcher. The water shifts around your legs and you feel another bite, and this one's deeper, hungrier, like the leech knows it's your day to suffer a little extra, and you laugh not because it's funny, but because if you don't laugh now, you'll cry later, and you're out of dry cloth to wipe your face with. You dump another handful into the bucket. Flex your toes and brace yourself for the rest of the day because it's still early and your quota hasn't been met, and the overseer doesn't care if the sky opens up or if your liver explodes or if your blood is 80% swamp water. He just wants results, and results mean more leeches, more standing, more pretending. This is fine. And when you finally turn to look back toward the village, a small silhouette waves at you. It's the boy from yesterday, the one who screamed when the leeches latched on. And for a moment, just a second, you feel something close to pride because he's still trying, still standing, still here. And so are you. Barely, but that counts. And as you raise your hand and wave back, your bucket slips slightly, spilling 2 leeches back into the marsh, and you mutter a curse that would make a monk blush. Then kneel to start over again, because this is the job. This is the life, and you thought waking up was hard. Wait until the work starts bleeding you dry again. You lose track of how long you've been standing in the marsh because time in this job doesn't move in hours or minutes. It moves in blood volume and the number of leeches fattening like smug little sausages on your calves. And right now, your legs are covered in a banquet. Your skin tingling with that familiar mix of sharp sting and numb drain. And as you blink against the drizzle and try to remember if you even had breakfast, you realize your whole day has already started blurring into a swampy fever dream. The kind where you're not entirely sure if you're collecting leeches or becoming one. You shift your weight slow and careful, trying not to spook the bigger ones, because nothing is worse than a prematurely detached leech, except maybe realizing your left foot has fallen asleep from standing still in cold water for too long. You wiggle your toes, not because it helps, but because it gives you the illusion of control. And that's really all you've got at this point. The sun is overhead now, or trying to be smothered behind a sky the color of old porridge, and your tunic is clinging to you like regret, heavy and wet, and starting to chafe in new and exciting places. But you can't stop yet, not until your bucket's full. Not until you've got enough to trade for a scrap of cheese and the right to sleep on a semi-dry floor tonight. You glance over your shoulder and see the village in the distance. The outlines of shingled roofs and crooked chimneys blurred by fog, and it might as well be 1,000 miles away for all the comfort it offers. Your home isn't a place, it's this bog, this watery purgatory where the leeches know your name and your knees crack like kindling, and yet you stay because leaving would mean something worse, something unspeakable, something like famine or crime or joining a monastery, and you're not quite ready to pretend chastity is a virtue just because you smell too bad for courtship. A splash behind you makes your shoulders jerk and your bucket nearly tip, and you freeze, listening eyes darting over the reeds and the glistening surface of the water. Heart racing like it thinks you still have the luxury of self-preservation. But it's just a stork or maybe a heron. You can't tell anymore. You've stopped giving names to things that might eat you, and you go back to work, shaking a few bloated leeches off your shin into the bucket and watching them squirm shiny and black and utterly content in a way you'll never be. And then, as if summoned by the collective misery of the bog, the overseer arrives riding a mule that looks just as exhausted as you feel, his face pinched into its usual expression of bureaucratic disappointment. And he doesn't even greet you. Just squints at your bucket, makes a dismissive grunt, and announces that your output's not meeting expectations, and you resist the urge to say something treasonous, because the last guy who got mouthy ended up cleaning chamber pots for the steward with his bare hands and no gloves. You nod instead, the international gesture for, I acknowledge your power, and will now return to pretending to be productive. And the overseer leaves as abruptly as he came, like a fart in the wind, and you let out a sigh so deep it nearly empties your lungs. The kind of sigh that comes from knowing you've got another 6 hours of this, at least, and your legs feel like someone's replaced the bones with damp rope. You sit for a moment on a half-submerged log, aware that you're probably inviting a fungus into your thighs, but too tired to care, and you take a swig from your water flask, which tastes like leather and pond, and chew on a crust of bread so dry it could serve as building material. And this is lunch. This is the reward for not dying before noon. You look down at your hands, caked in swamp and stained with old blood, and you wonder when they started looking so old, like tools more than flesh, and you realize you haven't felt warm in weeks. Not truly, not that deep warmth that reaches your bones and lets you unclench your shoulders, and your mouth tastes like regret and mold, and the faint iron tang of your own bleeding gums, but you stand up anyway, because there's no one to stand up for you, and because the leeches don't wait, and because not working isn't a form of rest. It's just a faster path to starvation. The afternoon drags on your legs, itching your vision, going soft around the edges, the marsh humming with insects and the occasional unsettling gurgle from something beneath the water, and you keep filling the bucket one bite at a time until the weight of it starts pulling at your wrist and your arm aches from holding it steady, and you start to fantasize about what it would be like to drop it and walk away. Just walk until the reeds turn to grass and the grass turns to road, and the road leads somewhere with walls and soup and beds not made of mildew. But then the wind shifts and brings with it the smell of the tannery, and your daydream curdles into nausea, and you remember that even if you made it out of here, you're still a leech collector with no coin, no skills, and no future. besides more of the same, and you sigh again. Lower this time, not out of frustration, but resignation, because this is your life. Not just today, not just this season, but forever. And maybe, if you're lucky, you'll live long enough to pass it on to someone else who'll hate it just as much. And maybe then you'll get to lie down and be still, and not be cold or hungry or afraid. But until that blessed moment, you have a bucket to fill, and so you wade deeper into the murk, leeches swarming your feet like it's feeding time at the zoo, and you're the main attraction, and you whisper to yourself just a little longer, because saying it out loud makes it feel real, even if it's a lie and you think you thought this was the worst part, the biting, the standing, the cold. But you were wrong, because the worst part is knowing that no matter how much you bleed, it will never be enough. You make it back to the edge of the village, just as the sky starts bleeding into dusk, that sickly lavender grey colour. That means you've got maybe an hour before the dark closes in and the air turns sharp and mean. Your legs are trembling from the weight of the bucket and the weight of the day and the weight of everything. You can't quite name, and your hands are slick with swamp and sweat and tiny traces of your own blood, and you don't bother wiping them because honestly, what would be the point? There's no dry cloth, no clean water, no dignity left to smudge. Just you and your bucket and the long shuffle back to nowhere. The overseer's already gone by now. Back to his hut with dry socks and a fire, and probably a bowl of stew he didn't earn. And the village looks the same as always, tired, lopsided and quietly disappointed in itself. You pass the smithy where someone's hammering out a horseshoe, the clang ringing out sharp and clear like a question nobody wants to answer. And you nod at the blacksmith's apprentice, who looks like he's one missed meal away from replacing you in the swamp. He doesn't nod back, just keeps working, jaw clenched, and that's fine. Nobody owes anyone warmth around here. Not when warmth is a finite resource, guarded like a secret. You cut through the square and avoid eye contact with the priest, who's standing outside the chapel, muttering to himself and feeding crust to the fattest rooster you've ever seen. And you feel that old twinge of resentment bubble up, not because the rooster's well fed, but because it probably has a better life expectancy than you. You keep walking past the weaver's door, past the communal well. That's still roped off after someone found a rat floating in it last week. Past the hovel, where old Edric keeps yelling at clouds and no one stops him because frankly, the clouds deserve it. And finally you reach your family's corner of this beautiful disaster of a settlement, where the roof still leaks and the goat still screams like it knows something you don't. You drop the bucket by the door, your arms burning, your fingers twitching, and you think about going inside, but you don't, not yet. Because once you're in, there's no coming back out, not until tomorrow. Not until the next round of freezing misery and slow motion self-destruction. So instead, you sit on the threshold back against the wall, legs stretched out, and let your head fall back until it bumps the door frame. Your eyes drift up to the sky, and you try to find a star, but the clouds are too thick, and the smoke from a dozen hearths hangs low like regret. The wind brushes against your face, gentle but cold, and for a moment it almost feels like kindness, like the world hasn't completely forgotten you. But then the door creaks open behind you, and your little brother sticks his head out, says dinner's ready, says it, like it means something, and you nod, haul yourself to your feet and step inside, where the air is slightly warmer, slightly thicker, slightly more alive. Your mother ladles something from the pot into a cracked bowl and hands it to you with a look that says, "Don't ask what's in it." And you don't, because it smells vaguely edible and you're too hungry to question anything. You sit near the fire, such as it is, more ember than flame, and wrap your hands around the bowl, letting the heat soak into your bones like it's trying to apologize for everything else. The others eat in silence, the kind that isn't awkward anymore, just a rhythm, a habit like chewing or praying or bleeding, and someone coughs and someone else mutters a half joke about a dream they had where they were rich and clean and owned shoes that matched, and nobody laughs, but you all think about it for a second longer than usual, because the image is just absurd enough to be funny, just tragic enough to hurt. And after the bowls are scraped clean and the last piece of stale bread is torn 3 ways, your mother sends the youngest to fetch water from the barrel, and your uncle starts snoring on the floor, and you stretch out on your patch of straw and try not to think about tomorrow. But of course you do, because tomorrow is just another version of today, and the day after that is worse, and there's no end in sight. Just more leeches, more bites, more cold, more nights like this, and your mind drifts as the fire fades and the shadows crawl in, and you wonder what it would feel like to float. Not in the marsh, but somewhere else, somewhere warm, somewhere. You don't have to earn every breath with a pound of flesh. You wonder what it would be like to wake up in a bed that doesn't smell like mold and smoke and lost to eat. Food that fills you, to wear clothes that fit you, to live a life that sees you. And the ache in your chest isn't hunger. Not exactly. It's something quieter, deeper, a missing you can't name. And it burns worse than any bite, and you roll over to face the wall where the wood is cracked and damp and cold against your cheek, and you close your eyes and wait. Not for sleep, not really, but for everything to stop. Just long enough to feel like resting. Counts for something. You thought you'd get used to this, that the body adapts, that the mind goes numb. But the truth is, it never does. It just gets quieter. And in the quiet, you still hear it. That gnawing voice that says, you are not okay, that this is not okay, that no matter how many leeches you collect or how many nights you survive, you are still disappearing, one breath at a time. You wake up to the sound of screaming, not the blood-curdling, demon in the hallway kind of screaming, but the dry, raspy, "this is my life now" wail of your neighbor yelling at his chickens again because one of them laid an egg in his soup pot or stole the last crust of bread, or maybe just looked at him wrong. It's impossible to tell with him, but it doesn't matter because you're awake now. And the dream you were having something vague and warm and impossible, involving dry socks and bread that didn't crack your molars, is already slipping away like everything else good. Your eyes crusted shut, your neck stiff from sleeping at an angle that would snap most barnyard animals in half. You peel yourself off your straw mat, which is now mostly just a damp pile of broken dreams and lice, and you shuffle toward the door with the slow, creaking pace of someone who has nothing to look forward to, except the vague promise of slightly warmer swamp water. And maybe, if you're really lucky, fewer bites in sensitive areas. Your mother is already outside beating the laundry against a rock and muttering prayers between grunts, and your uncle is standing in the yard holding a boot upside down like he forgot how shoes work. And you don't even ask anymore. You just nod at them both and start walking. Not out of choice, but because the longer you stand still, the more the day starts closing in on you. Like a damp wool blanket soaked in failure, your path cuts through the center of the village, where the morning chaos is already well underway. Kids fighting over a stick that one of them insists is a sword. A woman chasing a goat with a broom. A man arguing with the baker about whether or not he actually paid for the loaf. Currently stuffed down his tunic, and none of them look at you, which is both a relief and a reminder, because invisibility is safer, but it's also just loneliness with better branding. You reach the square just in time to see the notice board being updated with a fresh proclamation, which is never good news, and today's is no exception. Some new tax on leech harvests. Of course, as if the blood you're already giving isn't enough. Now they want coin too, and you read the words 3 times just to be sure. You're not hallucinating again, but nope, it's real. Some scribe in the Lord's tower decided that your suffering has economic potential, and now every squirming parasite you collect is subject to inspection, tally and taxation. You want to scream, but instead you swallow the acid in your throat, grit your teeth and keep walking. Because if you stop to argue, the steward's men will drag you into the stockade and leave you there long enough to get frostbite in places you don't want to name. The marsh feels even heavier today, not wetter, just heavier, like it knows something you don't like. It's waiting. And as you wade into the water, the usual cold rush hits your legs, followed by the familiar itch of tiny jaws finding purchase. And you tell yourself to breathe, to focus, to count 5 leeches on your right shin, 3 on your left ankle, one particularly bold one near your inner thigh. That's either suicidal or just a pervert, and you force yourself to stand still, to let them feed, to let the world spin on without you. Your thoughts drift, as they always do, toward escape. Not the dramatic kind, not galloping off on a stolen horse in the dead of night, but the slow kind, the kind where you quietly vanish. One bad decision at a time. Maybe you walk until the marsh ends, until the road bends toward a town that doesn't know your name. Maybe you start over, change your name, pretend you're something better than this. But then a mosquito lands on your nose and bites you right on the bridge, and you swat it, and it explodes in a tiny burst of stolen blood. And you're reminded that the world isn't here to help you. It's here to take from you one drop at a time. And that's when you notice her, the girl standing waist deep in the next patch over her bucket, already half full, and her expression a mix of determination and loathing. She's new, probably sent by her family as punishment or desperation, and she catches your eye and raises her eyebrows in that way that says, "Yeah, it's that bad," and you nod. Because what else is there to say? The swamp doesn't care who you are or what you've lost. It just wants your blood, and you give it freely, because the alternative is starvation and shame, and the slow erosion of whatever humanity you have left. She winces as a particularly fat leech latches onto her arm, and you look away, not out of politeness, but because watching someone else's pain feels too familiar, too close, too much, like looking in a mirror that's been submerged in mud. The sun creeps higher, but brings no warmth, only light, the kind that makes every detail worse, every blister, every boil, every bloated insect slithering through the water like a reminder that this world was not made for comfort. And as your bucket fills and your legs go numb and your stomach clenches in hunger, you realize that you've stopped feeling angry, which should scare you, but it doesn't, because anger is energy, and energy is expensive, and you just don't have the funds anymore. You thought maybe today would be different, that something would shift, that the notice board wouldn't ruin your morning, or that your boots wouldn't fill with swamp juice, or that you'd wake up and your body wouldn't feel like it's trying to fall apart all at once. But no, it's the same. It's always the same. And that sameness wraps around you like a moldy blanket and whispers, "This is it. This is all there is. And if you want something better, you'll have to bleed twice as much for half the reward. And you know you'll do it because you have to, because there's no one else, and because the marsh doesn't take no for an answer. By the time the sun starts sliding down its miserable arc toward the horizon, like it's too tired to stay up and witness your suffering any longer. Your bucket is nearly full, your legs are trembling, and the last bits of feeling you had below the knees are now just vague memories, which is honestly kind of a blessing, considering the number of open bites currently oozing down your shins, like you're a walking soup stock. You shift your weight carefully because you've learned the hard way that one wrong move sends half your catch slithering right back into the bog like traitors. And you are not in the mood to chase them again. Not today, not with the new tax looming and the overseer already threatening to start counting leeches individually just to prove a point. You wipe your sleeve across your face and instantly regret it because your sleeve is soaked in marsh water and something that smells suspiciously like duck poop. And now your whole face smells like a wet poultry coop. And still, you breathe. You steady yourself, because the day's not over yet, not even close. You've got one more drop-off, one more inspection, one more walk through the village where everyone pretends not to see you. And then maybe, if the gods are feeling generous or distracted, you'll get a scrap of food and a fire that stays lit past twilight. You start walking back the bucket, sloshing in your hand heavier now. Not just with leeches, but with the weight of your body giving up one muscle group at a time. The reeds whisper as you pass, not in a magical way, but in that irritating rustling reminder that you've been in and out of this swamp so many times. The plants probably know your name. The village appears the way it always does, hunched and crooked and vaguely resentful, as though the buildings themselves would walk away if they had legs. And as you approach the center square, you see the crowd forming a loose, grumbling cluster of villagers orbiting something new tacked to the notice board. And your stomach does that drop thing, not because you're curious, but because you're certain deep in your aching bones that whatever's on that board is going to make your day worse. You push your way to the front, ignoring the smell of unwashed humanity and overcooked lentils, and there it is, written in ink that's still drying, an announcement from the Lord Steward. Effective immediately, all marsh workers must present their buckets to a certified counter by sundown, or forfeit the day's wages, and the counter is now stationed on the far side of the village, which means you've got to haul your sloshing mess across every muddy yard and through every side-eye in town, just to maybe earn half a token and a lecture about quality control. And you almost laugh because of course they moved it. Of course they did. Why make things easy for the people, literally bleeding for their coin, when you can add a few extra humiliating steps to really drive home how disposable they are? You grit your teeth, adjust your grip and start walking. And it's a long, awkward trek, your arm burning your back, aching, your boots squelching with every step. And the worst part is the silence, not total silence, but that heavy kind, the kind where people watch you but don't speak, don't acknowledge. Just let their eyes slide over you like you're a smudge on a window. They don't care to clean, and by the time you reach the inspection tent, little more than a tarp stretched between two carts, you're ready to drop the bucket and your dignity, and call it a day. The man at the table doesn't look up as you approach, just gestures vaguely for you to set the bucket down. And when you do, he finally glances your way, lips curling into that familiar bureaucratic sneer that somehow manages to say, "You're beneath me," without using any actual words. He picks up a ladle, dips it into your bucket, swirls it, counts, slowly, makes a few notes, then announces, "You've got average yield," which is code for, "We're not paying you extra, no matter how many you brought." And he pushes a token across the table, small, worn, barely enough to buy a handful of root vegetables and maybe a strip of meat. If the butcher's in a good mood, you take it anyway, because arguing costs more than silence, and you turn to go. But then you hear your name called, not your full name, but the one they use when they're mocking you. And it's the boys from the tannery grinning like wolves leaning against the fence, with the swagger of people who think calluses make them men. One of them asks if you smell better when you're soaked in swamp water. Another asks if the leeches are your friends now. And the third just laughs and makes a noise that's probably supposed to be a leech sucking, but sounds more like a pig choking on its own pride. And you don't stop, don't look, don't respond, because you've learnt it only makes them hungrier. You just keep walking slow and steady, eyes forward, back straight, bucket swinging at your side like a middle finger. You can't afford to raise, and you make it past them, past the row of thatched huts, past the empty troughs and broken carts and the stone wall where someone scratched "better dead" than bled in big shaky letters. And you finally turn toward home, your body heavy, your mind blank, your soul tired, in that deep echoing way that doesn't go away with sleep. You reach the door just as the last light fades from the sky, and you step inside to the smell of turnip stew, weak and watery, but hot. And you sit by the fire, stretch your legs and stare into the flames as your mother mutters about new taxes, and your uncle coughs like he's trying to expel a ghost, and your brother asks if the marsh was bad today, and you just nod, because bad doesn't even begin to cover it. And there's no point trying to explain a job that asks for your blood and offers back silence. You eat your stew in small sips, close your eyes and try not to think about tomorrow, because tomorrow will ask for more, and you'll give it because you don't have anything else left to give. You don't plan to cry, but it sneaks up on you the same way cold does, gradual quiet, until you're sitting by the hearth with your hands clenched around a cracked bowl of turnip stew, and your eyes start stinging, and your chest starts doing that horrible hitching thing, where it's not quite sobbing, but not quite breathing either. And your family doesn't say anything, because no one says anything anymore. Not unless it's about food or weather or the sound someone heard behind the tannery last night. That might have been a ghost, or might have been a raccoon with ambitions, and you sit there feeling your own heartbeat thud against your ribs, like it's trying to remind you you're alive, but you don't feel alive. Not really just functional like a broom or a fence post or a wheelbarrow, something useful only when it's not broken. And right now, you're dangerously close to broken. Dangerously close to standing up and walking out into the marsh and not stopping until the bog swallows you whole. But instead you take another spoonful of stew, bland and hot and thin as your patience. And you swallow it like medicine, because you know. It's the only thing you'll get until morning. And even if it tastes like boiled guilt, it's still fuel, still calories, still a reason to wake up and drag yourself through another day. Your little brother says something about finding a coin under the floorboard, and your mother tells him to save it, and your uncle grunts and coughs and spits into the fire, and the whole hut feels like it's just barely holding itself together. like the walls are tired of standing, and the roof is waiting for one strong gust to finally give up. And you close your eyes for a second, just 1 second, and suddenly you're somewhere else, somewhere dry, somewhere warm, a place with actual blankets and beds and food that doesn't require imagination to taste. But then a gust of wind rattles the window, and reality floods back in like cold swamp water through a cracked boot, and you remember who you are and where you are and what tomorrow demands. So you set the bowl down and lie back against the wall, straw prickling through your tunic and the floor hard against your spine, and you stare up at the ceiling like it might change if you look long enough. But all you see are spider webs and smoke stains and the slow, inevitable drip of a leak that no one's bothered to fix in spring. And someone farts quietly, and someone else laughs quietly, and then everything goes still again. And for a while you just listen to the breathing, the sniffling, the occasional pop of the fire, and your thoughts drift not to dreams, but to chores, to coins, to the slow grinding wheel of time that turns every hour into labor and every day into endurance. You wonder what it would take to leave, really leave, not just in your head, but for real, to walk out and keep going, and find a town that doesn't know your name or your blood type or your quota. A place where leeches don't decide your worth and overseers don't judge your soul based on how many worms you fit in a bucket. And you wonder how far you'd get before your knees gave out or your stomach turned inside out or someone stopped you and said you don't belong here and sent you crawling back to the marsh where you do belong. Because no matter how hard you pretend you know, this life has marked you not just with scars and bites and a permanent limp, but with that invisible stamp that says you've been broken in, shaped by mud and fear and necessity. And that doesn't wash off, doesn't fade, doesn't change. No matter how far you walk, you're still the person who stayed. And there's a strange comfort in that, a twisted sort of peace in knowing that the worst already happened and kept happening and didn't kill you not yet. And maybe surviving is its own kind of resistance. Maybe every day you show up and bleed and haul and don't disappear is a kind of victory, small and ugly and thankless, but a victory all the same. Your breath slows, your eyes close, and for a moment you stop thinking, stop calculating, stop existing in that active, sharp-edged way that costs so much energy. And you drift, not asleep, not awake, just somewhere quiet, somewhere safe, until a loud bang from outside jerks everyone upright. Someone's shouting, someone's running, and your mother's already halfway to the door, clutching the fire poker like it's a sword, and you stagger to your feet, heart-pounding legs shaking, and push outside into the cold night, where a dozen villagers are clustered around the chapel, pointing, whispering faces pale in the moonlight, and you hear the words thief and blood and dead, and you don't know what's happened, but you know it's bad, because everything is always bad, and you edge closer, closer until you see it. Father Cedric slumped against the chapel steps, eyes wide, robes soaked in something dark, and a broken leech jar at his feet, shattered glass and glistening bodies crawling in slow circles, like they're still trying to do their job, and the crowd parts around him like he's contagious, and maybe he is, maybe whatever got him is catching not a sickness, but a truth, the truth that no one is safe, not the holy, not the hard-working, not the hungry, and especially not the ones who thought they mattered. And you look down at the leeches squirming on the stone, and you wonder if they know, if they remember his blood, if they tasted guilt or fear or something else entirely, and you step back slowly, quietly, because there's nothing for you here except more of the same, more waiting, more watching, more whispering, and the stars overhead blink like tired eyes, and the wind cuts through your tunic like a knife, and you think maybe tomorrow I'll leave, maybe tomorrow I'll run, but tonight you just go home. Close the door, lie down, and listen to the silence as it settles in for the night, thick and heavy and full of things that never got said. The chapel is still cordoned off the next morning. Not that anyone's brave enough to stand guard or clean up the blood, which has soaked into the steps like a grim offering. No god bothered to collect. And though no one said it out loud, you can feel it in the air, thick and stifling. The kind of silence that settles over a place after something truly wrong happens. The kind of silence that smells like guilt and mildew and old wood. And you walk past it on your way to the marsh with your head down and your bucket clutched close. Not because you're afraid to look, but because you're afraid of who might look back. The village is quieter today. Fewer kids in the mud. Fewer arguments near the bread cart. Fewer eyes meeting yours. Like everyone's trying to keep their head down just in case the thing that got the priest is still hungry, and you don't know what's worse, that someone might have killed him, or that no one's particularly surprised. You reach the edge of the bog and stand for a second, letting the wind brush past you. Like a warning, reeds rustling, like a whispered rumor. And for the first time in a long time, you hesitate. Just a flicker, a moment where your feet don't move, your body remembering what fear feels like before your brain catches up. But then you take a step and another, and soon you're knee-deep again, in that familiar slurry of mud and rot, and creatures with too many legs, because no matter what happened to Father Cedric, you still have to work, still have to bleed, still have to pretend your life is just a sequence of tasks and not a slowly unraveling horror show. You can't wake up from the leeches are slower today, maybe sensing your hesitation, maybe just cold, maybe in mourning for their best client, and you stand there as they inch their way toward your legs, like little grief counselors with fangs, and you let them, because that's the job, because standing still and being devoured is somehow the least terrible thing you'll do today. Your thoughts wander again, like they always do, when your body is busy being a buffet, and you think about religion, about Father Cedric and his sermons and his strange little ways of making your misery sound like salvation, and how he used to say the swamp was a test, a purification, a place where sin and blood washed away together. And you wonder what he thought in those last moments, if he felt clean or just empty, if he prayed or cursed, if he looked into the eyes of whoever did it and saw mercy or just another hungry mouth in a world full of them. And you wonder too if anyone will take his place, if the chapel will stay abandoned, the doors swollen shut with damp and dread, or if some new preacher will show up bright-eyed and soft-skinned, ready to fix everything with words and wine until the swamp eats them too. Because that's what it does. It eats people. Not just their bodies, but their hope, their purpose, their sense of what's right. And you've been feeding it for years now, drop by drop. And you're still here, still standing, still pretending. But you're starting to feel hollow in the places that used to ache, and that scares you more than anything. You lose track of time again, which is easy. When the sky is the same color as the water, and your own limbs feel like extensions of the muck. But eventually, your bucket is full or full enough, and you limp back toward the village, each step sloshing with the weight of parasites and self-loathing, and you avoid the chapel. Take the long way around, even though it adds 15 minutes and several more mosquito bites, because you don't want to see it, don't want to be reminded, don't want to feel the cold in your spine that crept in last night and hasn't quite left the inspection table, is manned by a different steward today, younger, cleaner, with a scroll of fresh rules. He recites in a bored monotone as he prods through your catch. Like he's looking for something he hopes he won't find, and you just nod and wait and breathe through your mouth. Because everything smells like vinegar and authority and disappointment. And when he finally hands you your token, he doesn't even look up, just says next, and waves you off like you're a puff of smoke. He's tired of breathing. You walk home past shuttered windows and drawn curtains, past a cart full of cabbages that no one seems interested in stealing. Past a dog tied to a post who barks at you like it knows you've seen something you weren't supposed to. And you reach your hut and you sit down and you take off your boots and empty them of water and worms and whatever else crawled in while you were working. And you stare at the floor for a long time, not thinking, not moving, just existing in the quiet. Your hands raw, your legs trembling, your soul worn thin, like the bottom of your only shirt, and your mother comes in and sees you and doesn't say anything. Just hands you a slice of potato and a look that says, I know. And that's enough because there's nothing to say. Not anymore. Not when the whole village is holding its breath and pretending it's not you. Eat the potato, slowly chewing like it matters. And you think about the chapel again, and Father Cedric, and the leeches, and the way the swamp never judges, only consumes. And you think, maybe that's the most honest thing in your life. Maybe the only thing that makes sense anymore is the part where you suffer, and the world doesn't apologize. And maybe that's freedom in its own twisted way. And maybe tomorrow, when you wake up and hear the rooster scream, and the floor creak, and your brother cough, like his lungs are trying to escape, you'll get up again and go back into the swamp and let it take more of you, because it's the only thing that knows how, and at least it never pretends to be kind. The night comes in heavier than usual, not loud or sudden, but slow and thick like fog, dragging its belly across the rooftops, and the air feels heavier with it, like the village itself is holding something back, some breath it's afraid to release. And inside the hut, it's too quiet. No one talking, just the occasional scrape of a bowl, or the snap of a twig in the fire. And everyone's pretending this is normal, that a dead priest outside the chapel is just another Wednesday, that nothing's wrong and nothing changed, and that none of us are wondering who did it or why, or if they'll do it again. And you sit on your mat with your knees pulled up, and your cloak draped over your shoulders, not for warmth, but to feel like something is still wrapped around you, like you're still held by something, even if it's just wool and habit. The stew tonight is watery, even by your standards. And your mother forgot the salt, but no one says a word. Because who's going to complain about flavor when the air tastes like death and smoke? Your uncle's been coughing more, and not the old man cough he always had, but something deeper, rattlier, like his lungs are trying to climb out of his throat to make a run for it. And your little brother asked if maybe he was cursed, but your mother snapped at him and sent him outside to feed the goat, which hasn't made a sound in 2 days and might already be dead. But again, no one asks, because asking leads to knowing, and knowing means doing something, and no one wants to do anything except survive. And even that feels optional. At this point, you finish your stew and set the bowl down and lie back against the wall, feeling the chill creep in through the cracks, not just from the air, but from the silence itself, from the weight of a village pretending not to unravel. And your eyes trace the ceiling, the gaps in the thatch, the way the smoke curls up into the dark like it's trying to escape the room. And maybe it is. Maybe everything in this place is trying to escape, and you're just the fool who keeps sticking around. The fire dies down to embers, and your mother starts humming a song you haven't heard in years, something soft and wordless. And maybe it's a lullaby, or maybe it's just the tune she sings when she wants to pretend she's not scared. And eventually everyone starts to drift off. One by one, heads nodding, breathing slowing, and you're the last one awake. Eyes still open, staring at the dark, wondering if anyone else heard the noise behind the chapel, or if that was just your imagination because you swear earlier, when you passed it on the way home, you heard something or someone moving around in there. Not loud, not obvious, just the kind of rustling that could be wind, but also couldn't. And you didn't stop, of course you didn't, because you're not stupid. You've seen what happens to the curious in this village. But now that you're lying here in the dark with the fire gone, and your thoughts crawling out of their corners, you're thinking, maybe you should have looked. Maybe someone was hurt. Maybe someone was doing something they weren't supposed to. And if it was just wind, then why are you still thinking about it? You close your eyes and try to shut it out, but sleep doesn't come. Not when your legs are still twitching from the cold. Not when your stomach is doing that hollow roll. It does when it knows you didn't eat enough. Not when every creak of the wall sounds like a footstep. And after what feels like hours of lying there wide awake and useless, you quietly push the blanket off and stand slow and careful, avoiding the spots on the floor that creak the loudest, because you're not trying to wake anyone. Not because you're sneaking out, but because you don't want to explain why you're sneaking out. And you slip on your cloak and boots still damp, always damp, and step outside into the night. The village is almost completely dark, except for a faint glow from the blacksmith's coals and a flickering lantern in the far tower. But no one's moving, no one's watching, and you move through the mud like a shadow, avoiding the puddles you know by heart, taking the back path behind the well and around the grain shed. And when you reach the chapel, your breath is shallow and your fingers are shaking, and you're not sure why you're here or what you think you'll find, but you're here now, and that's enough to make it real. The chapel door is still cracked open from yesterday, like no one had the courage to close it. Or maybe they tried, and it just wouldn't shut. And you step inside, and the smell hits you first. Old incense mixed with dry blood and rot, a kind of sacred decay that clings to your teeth. And the pews are still in place. But the altar's been stripped bare, and you see the stains on the floor dark and sprawling, like something was dragged, and there's a candle burning near the back, tiny and stubborn, and in its light, you see the back wall, where someone scrawled a symbol, something crude and jagged and wrong, and you don't recognize it, but it feels bad. It feels like looking at sickness, and your skin prickles, as if something just brushed past you. But there's no wind, no draft, no breath, except your own, and you turn around and leave fast, not running, not yet, but close. And when you reach your hut again, you're breathing hard, and your hands are shaking worse, and you crawl back into your place on the floor like nothing happened. And when the rooster finally crows and the morning creeps in like a thief, you don't tell anyone, not about the chapel, not about the candle, not about the symbol, because no one would believe you. And even if they did, they wouldn't do anything. And what are you going to say that you saw something bad, something wrong, something that feels bigger than this village, bigger than you, bigger than all of this? And maybe that something is already here, or maybe it's always been here, just waiting for someone to notice. You spend the entire next day pretending you didn't see anything, pretending your boots didn't track chapel dust into the house, pretending your fingers didn't brush against a wall marked with something too sharp and wrong to be ink, pretending that when you closed your eyes last night, you didn't hear whispers that didn't belong to wind or memory, or any sane thing that belongs to the world you've learned to suffer through, and you keep your head down while filling your bucket. Same as always, leeches latching on with that cold, eager certainty, like they've been waiting for you, like they can taste the change on your skin, and the marsh doesn't care that something's off. The marsh just wants blood and labor and silence, and you give it all three, because you don't know what else to do, because fear is just another weight you carry with your pail and your half-dried tunic and your lingering sense of directionlessness. The village is worse today, thinner somehow, quieter than it should be for market day. No music, no shouting, just the rustle of straw and the dragging sound of someone moving too slow to pretend they still care. And when you pass the chapel again, on the long walk back from the swamp, you keep your eyes forward and your breath shallow, but you feel it anyway. That same pressure, that same thick stillness that makes you want to run or scream or laugh in a way that would get you exorcised if the priest was still alive. And you wonder again what happened to him. Not the facts, not the blood on the stone or the crack in his skull, or the way the leeches curled into a perfect spiral like something summoned, but the why of it, the who of it, the part that doesn't get written down or whispered at the well, because the official story is still taking shape, and no one wants to admit that maybe there won't be one, that maybe there are things too old or too real or too unspeakable for the kind of truths that fit into neat village gossip. And the steward's men don't help posted now, near the square, with sharpened halberds and bored expressions, asking too few questions and writing too many names. And your name is probably already on one of those lists, because you keep looking at the chapel like it's going to blink or breathe or start bleeding again. And someone's going to notice. And when they do, you're going to be the next person no one mentions. So you drop your bucket at the weighing table, you collect your token, and you walk away with that same hollow pace you've perfected. And when you get home, your mother looks at you with eyes that don't even bother asking where you've been or what you've seen, because she's seen too much herself and doesn't have the words left for concern. And you eat your soup and stare at the fire and try to pretend the symbol on the chapel wall didn't follow you home, etched into your memory like a second heartbeat. You lie down that night and you don't sleep. Not really. You drift, you float. You try to disappear into that hazy nothing where dreams usually live. But there's no dream tonight, just flashes, shapes, the echo of footsteps on wet stone, and the sound of your own breath catching in your throat. Because you know somehow, in the deep part of your gut, that usually only warns you about spoiled meat or incoming weather. You know that whatever was drawn on that wall was not meant to be seen, not by people like you, not by anyone who bleeds into buckets and trades leeches for bread, and lives in the shadow of churches built on bones, and when you finally slip into sleep, it's thin and fevered and full of marsh water and teeth, and you wake up gasping, clutching your chest like you forgot how to breathe through your own lungs, and morning is already leaking through the boards, and your legs are already stiff, and the day is already waiting, and when you step outside it feels different. Not in a dramatic way, not in a storm is coming way, just in the subtle way things feel right before they break. The village is still there. Same crooked roofs, same sluggish dogs, same thin children dragging sticks through the mud. But something's gone missing, and no one wants to say what you head to the marsh again. Because it's what you do, because routine is safer than truth. Because if you stop moving, you'll have to admit that something inside you is unraveling, and you step into the water and feel the cold bite of it up your calves, and you let the leeches come, and you count them in your head like a prayer, and you try not to think about how far you've drifted from whatever version of yourself used to believe this was just a bad job and not some kind of punishment. And when you come back hours later, raw and sore and too light-headed to walk straight, there's a crowd in the square again, smaller this time, quieter, clustered near the edge of the well, and you know, before you even get close, you know, something else has happened. Someone else has gone, not killed, not exactly, but missing their name, murmured like a question. Their house left unlocked, their boots by the door like they meant to come back. And no one does anything. No one searches. No one demands justice. They just stare at the well, like it might offer a reason, like maybe the water knows where everyone's gone and you don't go near it. You can't because you're afraid of what you might hear if you lean too close, so you just go home and you lie down and you close your eyes, and the symbol flashes behind your eyelids like it's waiting to be spoken, and you realize the thing that's been gnawing at the edge of your mind all week isn't fear. Not exactly. It's recognition. You wake up before the rooster crows, not because you're eager, but because your body doesn't trust sleep anymore. Like it's decided rest is a liability in a world that keeps shifting under your feet. And you lie there for a minute, staring at the wooden beams overhead, counting the knots in the planks like they're keeping score. And the air inside the hut feels stale, thick, unmoving, like the walls are holding their breath, along with everyone inside. And when you sit up, your joints pop like twigs, your back complains, your knees wobble. But you get up anyway, because what else are you supposed to do? You're a creature of function now, stripped of purpose, running on repetition. And the thin hope that maybe doing the same thing again will yield a different outcome, even though it never has. And you step over your uncle's sleeping form, avoid the damp spot near the hearth, and open the door just enough to let in a sliver of morning and a breeze that smells like moss and fear. The village looks the same but quieter, like it's shrinking inward, roofs huddled together, windows watching each other, and the chapel is still dark. Its door closed now, which is almost worse than it being open, because now you can't see inside. Now you have to imagine what's there, and imagination has always been your enemy, especially now, when it seems more accurate than reality. You start your usual walk toward the marsh bucket in hand, boots still damp from yesterday, because they're always damp from yesterday, and each step feels like you're retracing a path that's already worn into your bones, and the marsh greets you the way it always does with cold water, and a silence that hums, and you wade in like always, and stand still like always, and let the leeches come like always. But this time there's something else, something beneath the surface, not physical, but heavy, pressing against your chest and wrapping around your thoughts. And when you look down into the water, it looks back, not with eyes, not with a face, just with presence, and you whisper to yourself to stop thinking, to focus, to count. But the numbers don't hold. They slip between your teeth like the dreams you stopped remembering. And when the bites come, they feel deeper, slower. Like the leeches are taking more than they used to. Like they found something new in you to feed on something you didn't know you were carrying. And by the time your bucket is full, your legs are shaking. Not just from cold, but from something more primal. Something knotted and ancient, and just barely awake. And you wade out without saying goodbye. Not to the swamp, not to the others, not even to the girl who's been working the far edge and hasn't spoken since the morning Father Cedric died. And you drag your feet through the mud toward the square where fewer people gather now. And those who do keep their voices low and their eyes lower. And you drop your bucket on the inspection table and don't flinch when the steward counts it like he's checking livestock. And you take your token without speaking and walk home without looking. And when you reach the hut, it feels smaller than before. Like the walls have shifted inward, like the roof is lower. And your mother is sitting by the fire, not cooking, not knitting, just sitting, staring into the coals like they're going to tell her something. She forgot to learn, and you ask if anything happened while you were out, and she doesn't answer, just blinks slow, and says, "Your brother didn't come home last night," and you sit down too hard, but breath leaving your body like, "It's had enough of this place," and she says it again, like maybe saying it twice will make it real, and you picture him, not your youngest brother, but the one just after you, the one who used to chase frogs and bite his nails and swear he'd leave the village as soon as his legs were strong enough to outrun the swamp. And now he's gone. And you know what that means, because no one leaves, not really, not without someone dragging them back or burying what's left. And your mother says maybe he's hiding, maybe he's sleeping in the barn. Maybe he's angry, but she doesn't believe it, and neither do you. And you feel your fingers curl into fists, because you should feel grief, but what you feel is heat, slow and thick and rising in your throat like bile. Because this isn't just bad luck, this isn't just poverty and bad food and leeches and taxes. This is something else, something that crawled into your village and decided to stay, something that started with whispers and symbols and blood on stone, and now it's taking people one by one like it's choosing. And you think about that symbol again, how it burned behind your eyes when you closed them, how it felt like recognition, how it felt like a memory instead of something new, and you wonder if you've always known it. If it's always been waiting, and if the swamp isn't just water and rot, but something older, something that sees. And you sit there staring into the fire beside your mother, and you realize something's changed in you. Not cracked, not broken, just tilted, shifted, reconfigured, and you don't know what it means yet. But you know it's not going away, and when night falls you don't sleep. Not even pretend you just lie there listening to the wind scrape against the roof and the walls creak like bones. And you wait, not for morning, not for dreams, but for the next name to vanish. You go back to the marsh before the sun rises, not because anyone tells you to, but because your body doesn't know how not to anymore. Because the motion of waking up standing, walking the path, stepping into the muck, and letting it suck at your boots, like it's trying to remind you who's really in charge. That's the closest thing you have to a ritual now, to faith. And if you don't do it, you're not sure what will hold the rest of you together, because with your brother gone, and no one even pretending to search, with your mother's eyes dull and fixed on nothing, with the chapel sealed up like a secret everyone's agreed to forget. There's no structure left except this miserable repetition of bleeding and carrying, and pretending you don't notice how the village keeps getting quieter around the edges, You make it to the water and step in, and the cold doesn't even register anymore. Your legs already numb before you reach the deepest spot, and the leeches come quickly this time. Like they're impatient, like they've been waiting just beneath the surface. And as they latch on, you stare at the tree line across the bog, and you remember being small, being stupid, chasing frogs with your brother, and daring each other to jump from log to log while your mother screamed at you from the shore. And you wish you could go back, not because it was better then, but because it was before, and before feels safer than whatever this is now. And you think about leaving again, really leaving, not just daydreaming about roads you've never seen, but actually doing it. Picking a direction and walking until your feet stop, or your luck runs out, or the world shows you something else besides mud and death and silence. But you don't move because there's nowhere to go, and because deep down you know what's happening here. Won't stay here, not this time. Not with symbols on sacred walls and people disappearing like smoke. And when you close your eyes, you see that mark again. Not painted or scratched, but glowing, pulsing like it's alive in your memory. And feeding off every time you try to forget it. And you feel it now, not just in your mind, but under your skin, humming low and steady, like it's waking up inside you too. And when you open your eyes, the marsh looks different. Not in any way you can explain, not darker or lighter or wider, just more aware, like it knows you're thinking about leaving, and it wants to remind you it's watching. And that feeling clings to you as you fill your bucket and climb out of the muck and start the walk back. And the air is heavy with fog and something else, something sour and metallic that makes you breathe through your mouth and walk faster without realizing it. And by the time you reach the square, there are more people than usual gathered around the well again, but not looking. In this time, just standing there with that same blank fear on their faces. And when you ask what happened, no one answers. They just step aside so you can see the bundle on the ground wrapped in cloth, but already soaking through with something red and dark and far too much of it for anyone to pretend it's just an accident. And you know, without asking that, it's someone else from the list in your head. Someone you noticed wasn't at the inspection table or the baker's or dragging firewood home from the forest. And the steward is there too. Not saying anything, just writing something down and handing off a scrap of parchment to one of the guards. Like that's gonna fix anything. Like recording the rot will keep it from spreading. And you feel yourself pulling inward. Your body curling tight around something invisible, something rising inside you. Like bile or prayer or both. And when someone suggests maybe it's wolves or thieves or illness, you want to laugh because it's not wolves and it's not thieves. And if it's illness, then it's the kind that starts in the bones of the village itself. And you look around and wonder if anyone else feels it, if anyone else is pretending not to notice the way the earth has changed beneath their feet. And you catch the eye of the girl from the marsh, the quiet one. And for a moment you think she's going to say something, but she just nods slow and small, like she knows what you know, like she's known it longer than you. And then she turns and walks away, and you let her, because you don't have the words either. Not yet you head home, and your mother doesn't look up when you walk in, doesn't ask what's in your bucket or how the work went, or whether you saw anything strange. And that silence is worse than any scream. So you sit by the fire and clean your hands and pick at a piece of bread that tastes like mold and ash, and try to make your mind blank, but it won't stay blank anymore. It keeps filling with flashes, wet stone claw marks on wood, the sound of something breathing beneath your floorboards, even though you know it's just your imagination, except you're not sure it is, not anymore. And that night you don't sleep again, not because you're afraid of dreams, but because you're afraid of how right they've started to feel, like memories you haven't lived yet. And when the rooster crows and the sky turns that sickly yellow grey, you know you'll do it all again, not because you want to, not because you have to, but because the only thing more terrifying than going back to the swamp is staying home and waiting for whatever's coming next. You don't remember falling asleep, but you remember waking up. Not from rest, but from exhaustion, giving out your body, rising before your mind catches up, like instinct dragging your limbs forward while your thoughts are still curled in a corner, refusing to come out. And the morning is the kind that clings to your bones, damp grey, unwilling to become day. And as you pull on your crusted boots and step outside, you realize the fog hasn't lifted in hours. It just settled deeper into the village like it's trying to stay hidden, like it knows something you don't. The path to the marsh feels longer, softer, and every footstep leaves a print that looks too deep to be yours. And even though you pass familiar trees and fences and muddy patches that should feel like home, you keep glancing over your shoulder like someone might be walking behind you, quiet and barefoot and smiling. But there's no one, just you and your bucket and the feeling that something's watching from just beyond the edges of what you're willing to see. The leeches come quickly today, drawn like they're starving, like they've missed you, like they know your blood better than you do, and you let them bite because it's easier than resisting, because the sting is almost comforting, a reminder that at least something still wants you. And as you stand there sinking slightly into the muck, the fog thick around your knees and the trees leaning in, like eavesdropping neighbors, your thoughts start to drift again, not backward this time, but sideways toward the feeling that none of this is random. Not the missing names, not the chapel door that won't stay shut, not the girl with the eyes that never blink at the right time. And you wonder if this village has always been like this, cursed in slow motion, a sickness that crept in through the cracks and took root where no one bothered to look. Or if something changed recently, something small that tipped the balance, just enough to let the wrong things in. You think about the symbol again, not just how it looked, but how it felt, how your stomach twisted when you saw it, how the air went still, how something behind your ribs whispered that you already understood it, before your brain even tried to translate. And you think about your brother, about the others, about what they might have seen, what they might have followed. And you realize you don't believe they just vanished. You think they were taken not by a person, not even by the marsh, but by something older, something with patience and appetite and a long memory. And you want to laugh because if someone told you this last month, you would have called them crazy. But now it feels obvious, like a bad joke with too much truth in the punchline. You finish the day in silence, your bucket full and your skin crawling. And as you trudge back through the village, no one looks up. No one speaks. Even the dogs keep their heads down. And the only sound is your own footsteps echoing louder than they should. You don't stop by the chapel. You don't need to. Because you know what's inside hasn't moved, hasn't slept, just waits. And when you reach your home and your mother isn't there, and the fire isn't lit, and the door is slightly open, and the floor is covered in tracks that don't belong to feet, you don't scream, you don't panic, you just step inside, set your bucket down, and sit your breath shallow, your body still, because there's nothing to do now but listen to feel. to accept that the end of this story isn't something you can run from. It's something you live through, and maybe you'll survive. Maybe you'll be the one left to tell it, to whisper it to the next fool who thinks collecting leeches is the worst thing a person can endure. But for now, you just sit, and the quiet stretches long and thin around you until it feels like night again. And maybe it is, and maybe time stopped counting, and maybe this is just another part of the marsh you never walked into before. And eventually your eyes close, not from sleep, not from peace, but from surrender. And if you're still listening now, if you made it all the way to the end, thank you for being here. Really, thank you for breathing with me through this story. Thank you for walking through the fog and the mud and the silence. You did better than most, and I hope tonight you rest easier than our poor friend here. I hope your bed is soft, your room is warm, and your dreams stay in the places they belong. Tomorrow's a new day, a good day, a quiet, gentle day, with more learning and more laughter, and fewer leeches. So go ahead, let go of the weight. For now you've carried enough. Close your eyes, take a deep breath, and I'll see you again soon. Good night.